Okay, so welcome everybody. This panel will be in English. Hello everyone online. I'm Viva from the Institute of Literature and Folklore, and it is my honor to welcome Maarja Hollo, who is a senior researcher at the Estonian Literary Museum, where she also leads a research group on life writing studies. She has previously published articles on trauma and memory in the narratives of Estonian women and in the works of Estonian exile writers. And her research now focuses on letters of ordinary people. Last year, she also co-edited a special issue on private letters for an Estonian journal of folklore. So today she will present her presentation called Ordinary Letters as an Archive of Feelings. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. First, I'll give a short overview of our collection campaign Letters in My Life. And after that, I'm going to talk about my research on the ordinary letters. So it has been one of the goals of the Estonian Cultural History Archives of the Estonian Literary Museum to gather and preserve personal archives, primarily of culturally prominent Estonians, including writers, artists, and translators. Most of these archives not only contain manuscripts, but also biographical material, correspondences, diaries, biographical notes, or other documents pertaining to the author's personal life. The Estonian Cultural History Archive started collecting the life stories and memoirs of ordinary people in 1989, when everyone could write their personal account without fear of censorship by the regime. And the title of the very first collection campaign was "Do You Remember Your Life Story?", which resulted in a few hundred life stories. Up till the present, a total of 13 competitions have been taken place, as a result of which the archive has been enriched by over 3,000 autobiographical texts. We started collecting of the letters of ordinary people in 2020, when we advertised the campaign Letters in My Life. We hoped that both correspondences and reflections and memoirs of the meaning of exchanging letters would be submitted to this campaign, so that writers would find it easier to articulate their thoughts. We also offered a list of questions. For example, how did the correspondence begin? Did communication with the addressee of the letters take place through letters alone, or did it include more ordinary communication? What was the relationship between corresponding and communicating on an ordinary basis? What did you find interesting in the correspondence? And what were the main topics of the correspondence, and how did you develop them? 45 people submitted letters to the campaign, and most submissions consisted of only one side of correspondence. In only a few cases, both the authors and the addressee's side were submitted. 50 people recorded memories of engaging in correspondences. And based on the topics of the letters, I divided them into 6 different groups. First, the letters of the Estonians who had fled to either Sweden or first to Germany, followed by the resettlement in Canada, the USA, or Australia, addressed to family members or friends who remained in the Soviet Union. The second group is made up of letters written by deportees to Siberia to their family members in Soviet Estonia. The third group consists of letters written by Estonian men serving in the Soviet army. The fourth group is made up of letters that trace either the relations among members of a family or friends during the Soviet era. And the topics of these letters are usually ordinary life or events in personal life. The fifth group consists of love letters written either between marriage partners who for different reasons were separated from each other. A few correspondences are of young people who had never met before, but whose relationship unfolded in the process of exchanging letters. Submissions were also made of love letters written by a married man to his married lover. And the last group includes the letters of two prisoners, one of whom was serving time in the 1930s in Tallinn Central Prison, and the letters of the other prisoner were written in the 21st century. As I said, in addition to the letters, submissions were made to the archive of various reflections and memories about exchanging letters. For over half a century, letters were the primary means of communication, and it enabled people confined behind the Iron Curtain to restore their relationships with family members, relatives, or friends who had fled abroad during the Second World War. Through letters, friendships also developed among children. Thus, for many long years, letters were written to 10 Poles abroad as well as elsewhere in the Soviet Union. The value of the letters as historical sources is foregrounded in the submissions of many authors. One of them emphasizes that letters preserve, I quote, what was thought, how people lived, what they wished for. In another submission, the author articulates the meaning of exchanging letters. I quote, actually, letters on paper are only the form. The content is and remains the person's basic need to be connected to the world and other people, to open oneself up and get to know others, striving to become closer to another person, as close as possible. Also getting closer to oneself. So it can be said that a large amount of material worthy of examination by historians, literary scholars, ethnologists, folklorists, and cultural researchers resulted from the campaign Letters in My Life. And now I'm going to talk about my research. I'll give an overview of Romuald Weidenberg's letters sent from Tallinn Central Prison to his relative Johanna Eisen, who had initiated this correspondence. Weidenberg was born in 1906 in the Soviet Union, and he arrived in Estonia to fulfill a secret mission. But his intelligence mission failed. He was caught at the border in 1931 and detained. The suspect's interview revealed that he was a student at the Communist University of the National Minorities of the West in Leningrad and was sent across the border for a secret mission. And after capturing, he was sentenced to six years at the Central Prison in Tallinn. Here are also some documents from prison time.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Okay.
Can you see them?
Yes, you switched screens now. Yes.
Yes. Just to show some documents about this time in prison. So I'm sorry that my PowerPoint is in Estonian. I just wanted to show some letters and a picture of him. His letters were handed over to Estonian Literary Museum by his daughter during the letter collection campaign, Letters in My Life. As I emphasize in my article, Weidenberg's letters are unique in the context of the mentioned collection campaign, as well as in the context of research into letters and feelings. And they are also an important addition to other archival sources on Weidenberg, available at the National Archives in Estonia, which shed light on the thoughts and feelings of a communist and his daily life in prison. As Aisen's letters to Weidenberg have not preserved, the research is based on a fragment of a larger picture that can only be imagined. So we cannot say anything of the addressee as a person or the reason why she decided to write to Weidenberg, a person she didn't know and had never met. And the first aim of my research was to explore how Weidenberg presents himself in his letters. And secondly, I was interested in which strategies he uses to create a sense of intimacy with the addressee, which allows me to consider his letters as love letters. Weidenberg wrote Weidenberg wrote his first letter in June 1934. And altogether, 22 letters from Weidenberg to Eisen have been preserved, having been sent from the Tallinn Central Prison. Although he ended the first letter with a hope of meeting the addressee someday, his later letters reveal that this wish didn't come true. In a letter written in 1938, he wrote to Eisen that he had destroyed most of her letters, but she carefully kept all of Weidenberg's letters, which indicates that they were important to her for some reason. In the case of Weidenberg's letters, one must emphasize the fact that they were thoroughly read before they were allowed to exit prison. Therefore, self-censorship is one of the main keywords in handling his letters. According to Anita Wilson, reading and writing are significant aspects of prisoners' routine social practices, and various forms of correspondence play a central role in maintaining modes of communication in prison. A prisoner who has many letters and cards to prove his wide social networks is considered to have higher status in the eyes of his fellow prisoners compared to a prisoner with no outside connections. The prison is a place of extremes, hence, according to Wilson, prisoners' letters may be characterized by excessive language, heightened emotionality, and various forms of exaggeration, including the visual side dominating in most letters and inordinate length. Janet Mabin, a scholar researching the correspondence of death row prisoners, identifies social isolation as the main reason for writing letters, although her subjects also saw pen friends as potential sources for funds, romance, and sex. For some prisoners, exchanging letters was important to emotionally overcome the death sentence and keep them sane. The most important aspects, according to Mabin, in the prisoner's relationship with their pen friends were trust and honesty. Creating trusting relationships with their pen friends allowed the inmates to express emotional attachment, affection, and care, which were absent from their daily life in prison. Exchanging letters was undoubtedly one of the main ways for creating and expressing emotional ties for Weidenberg as well, who found Eisen to be a trustworthy pen friend, but also a woman to whom he would express his romantic feelings, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly. The letters may form a kind of an archive of feelings, to borrow Anne Cvetković's term, which he has used for cultural texts that can be studied as sources of feelings and emotions. Letter researchers have, however, underlined that letters are not factual accounts of how people used to live or live now, but rather, I quote, evidence of how they represent changes in how they understand their lives and their relationships with their addressees. As any other author of an autobiographical text, the person writing letters analyzes their own life, creating a story comprehensible for them and the addressee of what they have experienced. This process may be conscious in part, but it can be directed by random circumstances, the writer's feelings, unacknowledged wishes and conventions related to letter writing. Comparing Weidenberg's letters to other documents from his time in prison clearly shows that the manner in which he depicts his life in prison to the addressee is the result of a careful process of choice. For example, in several letters, he writes of working at a prison shoemaking workshop, first mentioning it in a letter from January 1938 as a great way of killing time. Meanwhile, he stays silent about protesting against working in prison with other communists. And I think that such choices are characteristic of the construction process of an autobiographical subject, because people tend to portray themselves in a better manner and ignore the more unpleasant characteristics and experiences. Since Weidenberg's letters contain many discussions and thoughts about the writer himself, they provide great material to study how he presents himself to the addressee and what kind of image he creates of himself in writing. Weidenberg writes about himself a lot, which leads to the conclusion that he is indeed the central topic of his letters. He regularly writes of his physical well-being, as well as his current mood, hopes and dreams. And in his first letter, he introduces himself to Eisen as a simple, mundane person who is not fluent in Estonian, and I quote, who has the lowest expectations in life in terms of personal gain. Weidenberg repeatedly emphasizes honesty in his letters, declaring that he detests lies, which is why he never lies to his friends and comrades, and interprets ending up in prison as an accident of fate. In addition to honesty, he emphasizes his love for nature in his letters. Another important component of Weidenberg's self-portrait is his intellectuality. He often writes of reading or books he had just read or wanted to read, mentioning, for example, that he prefers philosophical literature, but would gladly read poetry as well. In a letter written at the beginning of 1938, he recollects his early passion for reading. I quote, "My youth revolved around books. Oh, the battles I had to wage with my mother. I would read through the night during meals. My mother would hide and threaten to burn them. I would carry books home from the local library 13 kilometers away. Everything available nearer I had already read." He often asked people to send him books, and in his letters he also portrays him as a big theater lover. And also mentions his great interest in cinema. Although he repeatedly confirms his bold and optimistic He's bold and optimistic by character, and I quote, has never built castles in the air. His letters take on more pessimistic tones every now and then. For example, in the autumn of 1934, he writes, I quote, you can imagine how time drags on for me compared to life in freedom, hence the occasional bitterness. I hope you understand me. You are the only one who still writes to me more or less regularly, but how long this will last, I don't know. I suppose you cannot predict this either. The letter written at the beginning of the 1938 relays a more optimistic mood. I quote, sad thoughts emerge every once in a while, but leave them behind. Live stuff, truth must be accepted boldly, without despair. Swedenborg is often the one to encourage his addressee to be more optimistic. I quote, yes, honey, more optimism. One must not only be strong and cheerful in all misfortunes on the outside, but keep up inner conviction, certainty, backbone. In another letter, he admits, I quote, I have developed such immunity that it doesn't allow for my mood to drop too low. Consistently assuring his addressee and himself to remain optimistic was undoubtedly a way for him to make life in prison more tolerable. It's indeed possible that it was specifically writing letters that helped him to survive the years in prison, far from his family and friends. In addition to Eisen, he corresponded with his mother, wife, and friends in the Soviet Union, as well as other relatives in Estonia. Even so, writing letters doesn't fulfill his need for self-expression entirely. For example, in a letter from 1934, he regrets that keeping a diary is not allowed in prison, as he loved keeping one when he was free. In February 1937, he complains that he only received 30 letters the previous year, 10 of those from Eisen, while admitting that most of the letters he sent were for her. Swedenborg and Eisen's relationship gets closer with every letter, which is, among other things, characterized by the way he addresses her. In the first four letters, he calls the addressee by her first name, Johanna, but from the fifth letter onwards, Johanna has turned into honey or dear honey. He even uses a phrase, little honey good girl. His longing for close relations is manifested in Swedenborg's plea for her to write, I quote, of everything, even the most trivial things, to get to know her better. Estonian literary scholar Lena Käosaar has brought out the three main strategies of creating intimacy in correspondence: reliance on shared memories, verbal confirmation of closeness, and various ways of familiarizing each other with the details of their everyday lives. This last strategy is the most prevalent in Swedenborg's letters to Eisen. By writing about the details of his everyday life, he creates an intimate space into which he invites the addressee. In one of his last letters, he even calls sending a letter visiting by letter. These mundane things mainly involve health and food. For example, Swedenborg writes about missing fruit, which was only available to exemplary prisoners, as well as vegetables, especially tomatoes. The second strategy of creating intimacy in his letters involves imagined discussions with the addressee. Usually, such an imaginary conversation begins by recalling a question posed in the addressee's previous letter. For example, in his second letter, Weidenberg describes how he imagines the addressee first asking, I quote, "By the way, you would like to know how I imagined you. I think you are a girl full of the joy of life, looking for activities, a girl who tries to bring herself into consonance with the environment. Despite the fact that it cannot satisfy her demands and the scope of her vision. Indeed, isn't everything narrow, petty, all those small everyday worries? But perhaps I'm mistaken, and I imagine myself instead of you." In another letter, he ponders why the girl doesn't trust him enough and concludes it's because he's of the opposite sex. I quote, "Although I am your friend in the most earnest sense, you are hesitant towards me. You are not like me, who has confessed to you all the twists and turns of my life, all my little and large secrets that interested you, except the secrets of the party and my profession. But I guess the difference lies in our sexes. I am a man, but you must make exceptions for some men. Doctor, teacher, prisoner, right? Or not? Oh, honey, honey, I have put together my own picture of you." Another way for Weidenberg to create intimacy in his letters is to mention an emotional connection to certain places. For example, in his first letter from June 1934, he recalls Eisen's hometown in South Estonia, which he visited in his childhood. I quote, "I too remember the beautiful lake in Võru and the bog next to the road leading from the station into town, and the great old pear tree growing in Aunt Anna's garden. I remember clearly as well." In his letters, he also recalls the village of Urvaste. It's also a village in South Estonia, where he was taken to visit his paternal relatives as a child. And the fourth strategy to create intimacy in Weidenberg's letters is to comment on the addressee's photos and ask questions about them. Weidenberg often expresses his feelings, connecting them with reflections on nature. In February 1937, he writes, I quote, "Spring is coming. The days are getting longer. There is excitement in the air, new life emerging, new hope in human hearts. Only I must experience it all in my mind in the present self, which is a miserable reflection of real life, real spring. I hope you can instill some sense of spring in me through your letters. It would be great for my soul, which would otherwise get very, very hoarse." The letter from May 1938 highlights the writer's conflict between the necessity of expressing romantic feelings and defining himself as a rational man. I quote, "I am bound to you with invisible ties. You have done this with your attitude towards me, but no, I cannot. I do not have the courage to commit my feelings to paper. As this might be a temporary passing feeling, I belong to a race of rational people." In addition to his longing for freedom, his letters reflect his hope to meet the addressee. So he often ends a letter with a message of hoping to see the girl soon. Longing is also the main topic of his last letter. He writes, "Just now, I finished reading an article titled Quiet Summer in Võru, published in the newspaper, Rahvaleht. And if you only knew how that small town is calling me. I want to swim in Lake Tamula, in Võru Park. But most of all, I want to see you in your home and in the neighborhood. See your family and the famous Võru ice cream manufacturer. However, the dream to meet Eisen in her hometown didn't come true. In accordance with the Amnesty Act passed in May 1938, he was released from prison, and in August the same year was sent to the Soviet Union. To conclude, Weidenberg's letters are a fragment of a larger, merely imagined whole. In addition to meeting relatives, exchanging letters was a means for Weidenberg as a prisoner to keep in touch with the free world and relieve the tediousness and mentally oppressive atmosphere of the prison. The importance of the correspondence is well characterized by a request at the end of one of the letters to write, I quote, about everything more often, and her letters bring great joy. Exchanging letters allowed Weidenberg to form a close relationship with a woman whom he never met in person, but to whom he would express his thoughts, confessions, and moods, and in the end, his romantic feelings. His private space created in letters offered an alternative to the fully controlled prison, a space where the writer seemed to turn into a protagonist of a confessional novel, whose self-image was at the same time influenced by constant self-censorship. As Weidenberg mainly writes about himself, in his letters he creates the portrait of an almost perfect man, honest, brave, and optimistic, a person who believes that, I quote, life is a battle and only the strongest win. So Weidenberg's letters can also be thought of as an archive of feelings, reflecting ways of expressing romantic feelings and strategies for creating intimacy in his area. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'll start with a few comments and then I'll open it up for questions. So please have some in mind and I'll turn online as well. So I found this case pretty exceptional. And one of my first questions is, why did you choose to focus on this particular story when of the whole campaign that you conducted of letter collecting? This is just one of 2 prison letters, and why you found this to be the material to research, because prison letters as their own sort of genre are especially interesting in that in the conditions of the 2 actors interacting. In this case, we only have one side of the correspondence of Weidenberg, who's in prison, but still it's the expectation of this kind of letter is to set a common ground of an affect of support. And this kind of genre still continues to today, where there's campaigns to write to prisoners with the understanding that they're in a situation of social and sensorial deprivation. And so this is one of the interesting points I saw in your talk, how even today, there's guidelines for how to write to prisoners, share as much detail as possible, don't ask anything about their incarceration, the reasons for it, make sure to tell them about yourself, and ask how they're doing, their plans for future and interests, and send any kinds of poetry, lyrics, or drawings. So the aim is to create this kind of bridge or understanding. And we don't know, in this case, the motivations of Joanna for writing to him in the first place, because all of her letters are missing. But I'm curious whether this was kind of a widespread practice at the time in the 30s when this exchange took place, whether there was this kind of broader social movement to reach out to prisoners. Also the idea here is that the person in the outside free world, so to say, is providing emotional support for the incarcerated person. But in this exchange, we see that Weidenberg is also providing emotional comfort and support and encouraging optimism in Johanna. So there,
Yes,
that also
certainly,
brings up this question of whether these letters are kind of a therapeutic encounter, and for whom, and how, how the prisoner winds up emotionally supporting Johanna, and also asking, yes, for that sort of sensorial and emotional fulfillment of his own psyche, and through her letters. So that's to start on the genre. Also, another point about prison letters is that even though there's this kind of a shared private space of what we spoke about in the last talk about an envelope, the roof of the envelope, where two actors are interacting with each other in a cozy, intimate space. But in the context of a prison, there's always a third surveillance apparatus in place as well. So even all of Weidenberg's letters were read when they left prison, as I understand. So that also brings into question the publicness or the privateness of this exchange. And I'm curious how you see that dynamic, even though this is in very sort of limited, very specific conditions, right, of a prison, but whether you see, by looking at all the letters that you collected in your campaign, if you were to look at them all as an archive of feeling, what kinds of feelings cut through the various genres, where you singled out 6 of them, right?
yes.
And 5 of them are situation-based, where it's somebody who is somewhere else, or either deported or a refugee, or but the one category stood out to me, and that was the category of love letters, and that brought this question to me of whether love letters, what's the rationale for singling them out as this privileged emotion that probably cuts through various of those other categories. So those are some of my questions to start.
Yes, but perhaps I would start from the very first. Why did I choose Weidenberg's letters for my research? And the main reason for that was that actually we don't have letters of prisoners. We didn't have before in our archive, and we actually don't know much about the prisoners' emotions and feelings, especially in the context of the 1930s. So for me, it was actually a big surprise that this woman decided to to participate in this campaign at all, because as I understood, these letters, her mother's letters, were very important, actually documents for her, for personal reasons. But she still decided to do that. And yes, I think that was the main reason for me to choose Weidenberg's letters, because I really think that it's very unique material in the context of this campaign. What considers your question about these love letters? I can say that actually why I choose the love letters as a distinct group was the reason that indeed in these letters love is the main topic between writers and addressees, but not as you guessed that it's not so in the other letters. So the letters of the other groups. So it's very, very distinctive actually. This kind of this group of letters. Would I label the love letters? And I don't remember the question before this very, very last.
Well, I was just curious about the social context, whether there was this practice of writing to prisoners or not. But
I think that it was actually very rare in those times, because this girl indeed didn't know anything about this man, only the fact that they were somehow relatives, but I think it was all. She didn't know anything before she wrote her first letter. So it was actually yes, interesting to think about it. What was the reason? I think that perhaps she somehow felt herself lonely, or I don't know.
Right.
Perhaps.
I actually wanted to ask, sort of, did you do any follow-up research, contextual research with the family member who brought you these letters to find out more of the biography of Johanna?
Actually, I talked Johanna's daughter, but she didn't know anything about this correspondence. Okay. And she also said that the mother never talked about it. So it was also interesting for me, because yes, it shows that this person was for some reason very important to her mother. But yes, mother refused to talk about the story. So
yeah, and that also brings into question how the archive of feelings, you talk about letters as an archive of feelings, but at the same time, this practice of campaigns collecting the letters there's feelings around that as well. And I'm very curious how the trust that you have to create in the people who provide you the material, right? Because you are making public something that has been part of one's sort of family history. So that there's also not just in the content of the letter itself, there's an archive of feelings in the context of its production, but also in the context of collecting the material. I see that, but I don't want to take up all the time. So is there anybody from who would have a question and would like to come up here and ask? Not yet. Please come here.
Hello, thank you ever so much for your most interesting report. I'd like to ask something about the settings of the jail as reflected in the letters, not so much about expression of feelings. Were there any hints or any explicit statements about censorship, about being followed while writing letters? Because later on in the Soviet period, prisoners would talk about people walking and peeping over their shoulders in the letters that they were supposed to write. And that was, well, a very strict form of censorship. They would not dare to write what they would like to. And how this could have influenced the tone of the letter, and even choosing to write mostly about feelings. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's a very good question, because in some letters Weidenberg expresses very clearly that you can't, writing to Johanna, that you are not allowed to write about politics, for example. And there were some other topics too, but I don't remember so clearly. But I remember that he mentioned the topic of politics, that it wasn't, he wasn't allowed to talk about it in his letters. So that the prisoners were very conscious of these restrictions for them, and also the topics they were not allowed to write about. So, and also the addresses. But I don't remember that it was the topic she wrote about very often. I remember only 2 or 3 letters where he meant it at all. So.
And I could just add to this that part of your method was compare or to deal with the omissions that are in the letter of self-presentation. You also looked at archival documents of his prison record, where some of his political beliefs are more described in his behaviors and the protocols that that he was punished for in prison there. So that's an interesting sort of triangulation of documents, I think. Is there anybody,
Yes.
anyone else who would like to ask something here?
Yeah, hi. Do you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. To extend the theme about the restrictions of writing, did you notice like any language codes, how he maybe masks what he wanted to say? Just like I don't know, speaking in codes, did you notice any signs of that? And another question is, did you notice any change of language, maybe in vocabulary, in fluency? Is it evolving? While I believe that he wasn't used to write like every day or every week, because usually when you write, it should change. So in a time span, did you notice the tone changing, the language skills, and etc.?
Yes,
thank you.
In many letters, he actually uses phrases in Russian. Spasibo, for example, just very, very simple and everyday phrases. But yes, I think it's quite natural, because Russian was his first language. Although he was Estonian, but yes, he was born in the Soviet Union and he studied there, so it was his first language. Yes, and in one letter he even explains that my Estonian is quite poor. I don't know. I think that I even mentioned that quote in my presentation. But the first question was
about speaking in codes, like masking some information, like someone is reading his letters, yeah, before they leave. So did he use any codes to hide what he wants to say for the checkers not to understand?
No, I
You didn't notice.
No. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, come here, please.
Talking about the codes, it was the usual code for prisoners to use plural while talking alone. And in Russian, they would say, "Мы пишем вам письмо." It means that they are not alone. So the letters would differ, either first person singular or plural. And that was kind of prisoners' folklore that was widely accepted. Another quotes were talking about politics, citations of Lenin, a specific page you have to go to read and then decipher for yourself, having the whole context of the letter. So what they would do, they would simply give citations from seemingly very politically correct books.
Thank you. We have one question in the chat asking to clarify, was he born in the Soviet Union, since he was born in 1906?
Yes, I actually showed this slide. Unfortunately, it's in Estonian, but yes, this is the information about him.
Yes, Aurelia, do I have to unmute? No.
Yes, I thank you very much for your presentation. I have a very short question, since I will be speaking after you and about our campaign of collecting letters. I'm just curious, maybe I've missed this. How many of these letters you actually collected during your campaign? So how big is the archive that you've managed to collect? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I actually can't say about it because nobody has made such an research, because it's actually, I think, hundreds. They sent hundreds of letters, but I can't say anything. You know, I don't know the exact number of how much did they send totally. So.
And just to clarify, you've mentioned, so how many people actually did respond to this campaign?
I actually mentioned it in the beginning of my presentation. 45 people submitted letters, and 50 sent their memories about exchanging letters. So it can be said that it was very popular campaign. And I'm actually very happy because yes, it was the first time we got so much material about ordinary people. We didn't have anything actually. We only had letters of famous writers and musicians and so on, but not ordinary people's letters. So yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, anyone else? No? Online? Then I'll conclude with a comment and actually another question, because, well, for me, what was one of the most intriguing tensions here that I found was that these are strategies of creating intimacy that you mentioned, of mentioning places that he remembers, that they don't have shared memories. These are two people who are sort of groping for creating a shared space that they never had in person, right? So shared of her Voiru, where she's from, the details of everyday life, these imagined discussions with Johanna. Now, these imagined discussions, I found myself questioning how much this is actually building intimacy and how much this is a reflection of solipsism and further, or just self-projection perhaps, which Wedenberg himself is very reflexive and self-aware of, where he's saying, I have painted a picture of you, perhaps I have only attributed my own character traits to you, but this is how I see you. So there's very much this tension of how he's imagining this other, but very self-aware that it's in his own mind as well. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes, but I think that his wish to imagine his addressee actually is a sign that that he actually yearns a lot for the intimacy. For me, I interpret it as a sign for yearning such kind of intimacy. So I interpreted this how do you say, discussions, imaginary discussions, as a strategy of creating intimacy. But also, I think also this little confessions in his letters also is a kind of strategy to create his intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
I later, when I already had published it, I started to think about it, and I think that it's also somehow a way to create such kind of space, this intimate space. If you really confess very, very, how to say, secret details of your life or of your feelings, so on. So.
Yeah, and also as a way to compensate for the sort of institutional violence that he's subjected to. But
Yes.
also I'm curious, this is the final question I have. Your article was titled with a quote from his letter saying, "I am like green firewood, never going out, but never catching fire." And I never saw where that quote is explained. And the way I wound up interpreting it is it part of his projection strategy where he's saying he has this quality of tenacity, of smoldering in a situation that could crush him? Or I didn't know how to read that quote, but it wound up taking me to this idea of ambivalence and how much ambivalence we see in his self-portrait, even where he's caught between affection and romantic feelings, but also rationality, or even his proclamations of honesty while he's working as a spy and definitely lied to get out of situations.
But
so,
I think that this quote I chose for my title also shows that it's a little part of the discourse of confession, because through this quote, through this phrase, he actually expresses his inability to live so-called normal life, to love a woman, to be together a woman he loves, or he had feelings. So that was my point. Why did I choose this?
I see. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that context. And if there are no more questions online either, then yeah, thank you for sharing how to see letters as this intersubjective space, even when we only have one side of the story, as a site of self-reflection and self-projection, and also forging an imaginative shared world that also has real consequences for a prison, where the letters can have, determining consequences within an institution. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these wonderful questions and for this discussion.
So then we'll have a coffee break for half an hour or 25 minutes then. So thank you. Are you